I drove 8 hours through mountain roads and summer storms to watch my granddaughter walk down the aisle, only to discover they'd seated me at the staff table because I was financially embarrassing. What they didn't know was that their photographer had accidentally recorded everything they said about me in the bridal suite. By the end of the reception, the whole family learned exactly what being truly embarrassing looked like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Hastings, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen every possible way a family could break your heart. I was wrong. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in March, elegant cream cardstock with gold embossed lettering that spelled out my granddaughter Rebecca's wedding details. June 15th at the Rosewood Manor in Asheville, North Carolina, 8 hours from my small apartment in Valdosta, Georgia. I held that invitation like it was made of spun gold, reading Rebecca's handwriting over and over. Grandma Ellie, I can't imagine my special day without you there. Please come celebrate with us. Love always, Becca. Those words meant everything to me because Rebecca had always been my heart, the bright spot in a family that had grown increasingly distant over the years. You see, 5 years ago, my late husband Thomas and I lost everything in what the newspapers called the Meridian Investment scandal. Thomas had worked for Meridian Financial for 37 years, climbing from a junior accountant to senior partner. We'd invested our entire retirement savings with the firm, trusting the man who'd built his career there. When the FBI raided their offices and discovered the massive Ponzi scheme, Thomas and I were among the hundreds of families left with nothing. The stress killed my Thomas within 6 months. Massive heart attack at 68, sitting in our lawyer's office trying to figure out how to keep our house. I lost my husband and our life savings in the same devastating year. The beautiful colonial home where I'd raised my daughter Jennifer and hosted countless family gatherings was sold to pay legal fees. The vacation home on Lake Hartwell, the classic Mercedes Thomas loved to drive on weekends, the savings account we'd planned to use for traveling the world in retirement, all of it vanished. Jennifer, my only child, had married well to a successful orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Richard Pemberton. They lived in a sprawling mansion in one of Asheville's most exclusive neighborhoods, sent their 3 children to private schools, and belonged to the country club, where memberships cost more than I now lived on in a year. After Thomas died and the financial devastation became public knowledge, Jennifer's phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Visits stopped altogether. She never said it directly, but I understood. I was no longer the successful, comfortable mother she could proudly introduce at her charity galas and tennis club luncheons. I was the woman whose husband had been foolish enough to trust the wrong investment firm. I was the reminder that financial security could disappear overnight, and that made Jennifer's wealthy friends uncomfortable. I had become, in their world, an embarrassment, but Rebecca was different. My granddaughter, now 24 and fresh out of graduate school, had always maintained our relationship despite her parents' growing distance. She called every week, sent thoughtful cards on holidays, and visited me twice a year, always alone, because her parents claimed to be too busy. Rebecca understood that losing everything hadn't changed who I was at my core. She still saw me as the grandmother who'd taught her to bake chocolate chip cookies, who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd cheered at every school play and soccer game. When she got engaged to Marcus Wellington, a young attorney from a prominent Charleston family, I was thrilled for her happiness. She'd called me immediately after he proposed, bubbling with excitement as she described the romantic proposal on the beach at sunset. "Grandma, I want you to walk me down the aisle," she'd said through happy tears. "I know it's not traditional, but Grandpa Thomas is gone, and you're the person who taught me what real love looks like." I'd wept with joy at her words, feeling blessed that at least one member of my family still valued our bond. The next day, I'd used a portion of my small savings to buy a modest but elegant navy dress for the occasion. Nothing too flashy, but appropriate for the mother figure giving away the bride. I'd had my silver hair professionally styled and even splurged on new shoes that matched the dress perfectly. The morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn in my tiny studio apartment, too excited to sleep. I had driven the 8-hour route to Asheville twice before to visit Rebecca, so I knew the mountain roads well. The forecast called for afternoon thunderstorms, but I left early enough to arrive with plenty of time to spare. I wanted to help with any last-minute preparations and spend a few precious moments with Rebecca before the ceremony. Rosewood Manor was even more spectacular than the pictures on their website. The historic estate sat on 40 acres of manicured gardens with the Blue Ridge Mountains providing a breathtaking backdrop. Vintage Bentleys and luxury sedans lined the circular driveway as well-dressed guests arrived for the 4 o'clock ceremony. I parked my 15-year-old Honda Civic between a gleaming BMW and a Mercedes, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my modest vehicle among such obvious wealth. The manor's interior was a vision of old-world elegance, with crystal chandeliers, mahogany woodwork, and Persian rugs that probably cost more than my annual income. I approached the registration table where a young woman in a black suit was checking names against her list. "Eleanor Hastings," I said warmly, smoothing my navy dress. "I'm the bride's grandmother." The woman scanned her list twice, frowning slightly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hastings, but I don't see your name on the main guest list. Let me check with the wedding coordinator." She stepped away to whisper with another staff member, leaving me standing awkwardly as other guests flowed past me into the reception area. "Mrs. Hastings?" A woman in an expensive-looking burgundy suit approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Caroline Meyer, the wedding coordinator. There seems to be a small seating confusion. If you'll follow me, I'll get you situated." She led me through the elegant reception hall, where round tables draped in ivory linens displayed elaborate centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath. The head table was positioned on a raised platform, adorned with cascading floral arrangements that must have cost thousands. Other tables were clearly designated for family and close friends, with elegant place cards bearing names I recognized from Rebecca's stories about her life. But Caroline didn't stop at any of these tables. Instead, she led me to the very back corner of the room, near the service entrance, where a simple table was set with basic white plates and no centerpiece. "This will be your table," she said brightly, as if she was doing me a tremendous favor. I looked around confused. The table was clearly meant for vendors or staff members, positioned where the view of the ceremony would be partially blocked by decorative columns. "I think there's been a mistake," I said politely. "I'm Rebecca's grandmother. Shouldn't I be seated with the family?" Caroline's smile became even more strained. "Oh, this is where Mrs. Pemberton specifically requested you be seated. She felt you'd be more comfortable here with the other." She paused, searching for the right words. "The other attendees who aren't part of the main wedding party social circle." The humiliation hit me like a physical blow. Jennifer had deliberately seated me with the hired help, as far from the family tables as possible. I was being hidden away like a shameful secret, tucked into a corner where her wealthy friends wouldn't have.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
To acknowledge my existence. The message was crystal clear. I was not worthy of sitting among people who mattered. "I see," I managed to say, my voice barely steady. "And Rebecca approved this seating arrangement?" "Oh, the bride is far too busy with preparations to worry about seating charts," Caroline replied dismissively. "Mrs. Pemberton handles all those details. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on the bridal party." I stood alone beside that humiliating table, watching well-dressed strangers take their places at beautifully appointed tables near the front. I recognized some faces from Rebecca's social media posts, friends from graduate school and colleagues from her new job. They were laughing and chatting, excited to celebrate my granddaughter's happiness. Meanwhile, I'd been relegated to eating with the catering staff and photographers, hidden away like something shameful. The weight of my financial circumstances had never felt heavier. These people didn't see Eleanor Hastings, the woman who'd raised a successful daughter and loved a granddaughter with all her heart. They saw the woman who'd lost everything, the embarrassing relative who didn't belong in their expensive world, the woman who drove an old car and wore a dress from a department store instead of a designer boutique. But the deepest cut was realizing that Jennifer had orchestrated this humiliation. My own daughter, the child I'd sacrificed for and supported through medical school and residency, had decided I was too financially embarrassing to sit with her family. She'd rather hurt and humiliate me than risk having her wealthy friends discover she had a mother who lived modestly. As I sat down heavily in the uncomfortable metal folding chair, I noticed the photographer's assistant setting up equipment nearby. A young man with kind eyes and an expensive-looking camera around his neck. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked quietly, apparently noticing my distress. "You look like you might need some water or fresh air." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile, just taking a moment to appreciate how beautiful everything looks. "It is gorgeous," he agreed, adjusting his camera settings. "I'm Jake Morrison, by the way. I'll be documenting the whole event today. Are you family of the bride or groom?" "Rebecca's grandmother," I said, trying to inject some pride into my voice despite the circumstances. His eyebrows rose in surprise as he glanced around at my isolated seating situation. "Grandmother? But you're sitting way back here. That seems—" He stopped himself diplomatically, but I could see the confusion in his expression. "Apparently, this is where I belong," I said quietly, smoothing my navy dress again. Jake looked genuinely troubled by this information, but before he could respond, the string quartet began playing the processional music. Guests turned their attention toward the back of the hall where the ceremony would begin. I craned my neck to see past the decorative column that partially blocked my view, determined not to miss Rebecca's entrance despite my humiliating seating assignment. The bridesmaids looked lovely in their sage green gowns as they walked down the white carpeted aisle. Rebecca's maid of honor, her college roommate Sarah, carried a stunning bouquet of white peonies and smiled radiantly at the assembled guests. Then the music swelled into the traditional wedding march, and every person in that elegant room stood to honor the bride's entrance. Rebecca appeared at the back of the aisle, and my breath caught in my throat. She was absolutely radiant in a flowing ivory gown, with delicate lace sleeves and a cathedral-length veil. But instead of walking alone or with Jennifer's husband Richard, she was being escorted by Jennifer herself, resplendent in a champagne-colored mother-of-the-bride dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My heart shattered as I watched my daughter walk my granddaughter down the aisle, taking the place of honor that Rebecca had promised to me months earlier. Jennifer beamed with pride and happiness, nodding graciously to friends and family as she performed the sacred duty of giving away her daughter. The photographer captured every moment, the joy and love evident on both women's faces as they made their way toward Marcus and the officiant. They'd replaced me entirely. Not only had I been seated with the help like some embarrassing burden, but they'd erased me from the ceremony itself. Rebecca had asked me to walk her down the aisle, had said she wanted me in that place of honor because I'd taught her about real love. But somewhere between that phone call and today, Jennifer had convinced her daughter that having a financially struggling grandmother in such a prominent role would be inappropriate for their social standing. As Rebecca reached the altar and Jennifer kissed her cheek before taking her seat in the front row, I felt invisible tears sliding down my face. I was watching my beloved granddaughter's wedding from the shadows, hidden away like a family secret too shameful to acknowledge. The woman who'd helped raise Rebecca, who'd loved her unconditionally through every phase of her life, had been deemed unworthy of witnessing this moment from anywhere but the back corner of the room. The ceremony was beautiful, despite my painful view of it through decorative obstacles. Rebecca and Marcus exchanged heartfelt vows that spoke of commitment, partnership, and building a life together based on love and mutual respect. I found myself thinking about my own wedding to Thomas 45 years earlier, a simple ceremony in a small church with folding chairs and grocery store flowers. We'd had no money for elaborate decorations or expensive venues, but our families had surrounded us with love and support. Money hadn't mattered then, because what we were celebrating transcended material wealth. But apparently in Jennifer's world, love wasn't enough to earn you a place at the family table. Financial status determined your worth, and I'd been found lacking. As the newlyweds shared their first kiss as husband and wife, I wondered if Rebecca knew about the seating arrangement, if she'd approved of my humiliation, or if she'd been so caught up in wedding preparations that she'd trusted her mother to handle the details with kindness and respect. After the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the cocktail reception area, I remained seated at my isolated table, unsure of what to do. Should I approach Rebecca to congratulate her, risking an awkward scene that might embarrass her in front of her new in-laws? Should I slip away quietly and drive home, sparing everyone the discomfort of acknowledging my presence? Or should I stay and endure the remainder of this humiliation for the chance to spend a few moments with my granddaughter on her wedding day? Jake the photographer appeared beside my table again, this time looking genuinely concerned. "Mrs. Hastings, I've been photographing weddings for 8 years, and I've never seen a grandmother seated so far from the family. Are you sure you're okay with this arrangement?" I looked up at this kind young man who seemed to be the only person in the room treating me with basic human dignity. "What choice do I have?" I asked softly. "This is where they want me." "But you're Rebecca's grandmother," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You should be at the head table, or at least with the immediate family. This is—" He struggled for words. "This just doesn't seem right." His genuine concern for my situation was the first kindness I'd experienced since arriving at this beautiful venue. "Thank you for caring," I told him sincerely. "It means more than you know." "Listen," Jake said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear. "I'm going to be moving around the reception taking pictures. If you'd like, I can make sure to capture some good photos of you with Rebecca when the opportunity arises. Every grandmother deserves pictures with her granddaughter on her wedding day." His thoughtfulness brought fresh tears to my eyes. "That would be wonderful," I whispered. "I'd be very grateful." As Jake moved away to begin photographing the cocktail, I sat alone with my thoughts and my heartbreak. The other people at my table were indeed catering staff and vendors. Kind, working-class folks who were perfectly pleasant company but who were clearly as confused as I was about why a family member was seated with them. They politely included me in their conversations, but I could see the questions in their eyes. The reception dinner began with Jennifer offering a toast to the happy couple that brought tears to everyone's eyes except mine. She spoke eloquently about watching Rebecca grow into a strong, independent woman, about the joy of seeing her find true love with Marcus, and about the bright future that lay ahead of them. She mentioned Thomas briefly, saying he would have been so proud to see this day, but she never once acknowledged my presence or contribution to Rebecca's life. From my corner table, I watched the celebration unfold like a beautiful movie I wasn't allowed to participate in. The first dance between Rebecca and Marcus was magical, her ivory gowns swirling as they moved together in perfect harmony. The father-daughter dance between Rebecca and Richard was sweet and touching, with Rebecca laughing at something he whispered in her ear. The mother-daughter dance with Jennifer was elegant and graceful, both women beaming with happiness. But there was no grandmother-granddaughter dance. No moment where Rebecca sought me out to share a special memory or include me in the joy of her celebration. I remained invisible in my corner, watching the most important day in my granddaughter's life from a distance, both physical and emotional. During the dinner service, while other tables enjoyed elegant plated meals served by uniformed waitstaff, my table received simple buffet-style portions brought by the catering manager. The message was unmistakable. Even the food service reinforced that I was not a real guest, but rather someone being fed out of obligation or politeness. As the evening progressed and the dancing began, I debated whether to stay until the end or quietly slip away. My heart wanted to remain, to be present for every moment of Rebecca's special day, but my spirit was crushed by the sustained humiliation of my treatment. Every laugh from the family tables, every toast from friends and loved ones, every joyful moment I witnessed from my isolated corner served as a reminder that I'd been deemed unworthy of participating in my own granddaughter's happiness. That's when Jake appeared at my table again, but this time his expression was troubled in a different way. He glanced around nervously before leaning down to speak quietly near my ear. "Mrs. Hastings, I need to tell you something important. Something you need to know about what's been happening here today." I looked up at him, confused by his serious tone and obvious agitation. "What do you mean?" "I've been recording everything today, for the wedding video, audio and visual. And some things were picked up by my equipment that I think you should hear. Things that were said about you when people thought no one was listening." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" Jake looked around again to ensure privacy, then pulled out his phone. "I recorded the bridal party getting ready this morning. The microphones pick up conversations from all over the room, And sometimes people forget we're there. Mrs. Hastings, your daughter and some of the other family members said some very cruel things about you. Things you deserve to know about. I stared at him, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Whatever was on that recording, I knew it would be painful to hear, but I also knew I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Exactly how my own family really viewed me. Show me, I said quietly, steeling myself for whatever devastating truth was about to be revealed. Jake glanced around once more, then positioned his phone so only I could see the screen. I'm sorry you have to hear this, he said softly as he pressed play, but I think you deserve to know the truth about what's really happening here today. The video showed the bridal suite from earlier that morning. A luxurious room filled with flowers, champagne, and excited women getting ready for the ceremony. Rebecca looked beautiful in her white silk robe, her hair in curlers as the makeup artist worked on her glowing face. Jennifer moved around the room directing various preparations, elegant in her champagne-colored robe. Every inch the mother of the bride managing her daughter's perfect day. But it was the conversation happening between Jennifer and Rebecca's future mother-in-law, Mrs. Wellington, that made my blood run cold. I have to say, Jennifer, you've done a remarkable job with the guest management, Mrs. Wellington was saying in her cultured Charleston accent. Very tasteful choices about who sits where. Jennifer laughed, a sound I'd heard countless times but never with quite this edge of cruelty. Well, you know how it is, Patricia. Some family situations require delicate handling. You can't let sentiment override good judgment. Oh, you mean Rebecca's grandmother? Mrs. Wellington's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. I was wondering about the seating arrangement there. Eleanor is… Jennifer paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. Let's just say she's financially embarrassing. She lives in this tiny apartment in Georgia, drives a car that's older than some of our guests, and shops at discount stores. Can you imagine if I'd seated her at the family table with the Charlestons and the Ashfords? The whispers would have been unbearable. Mrs. Wellington made a sympathetic clucking sound. How unfortunate. But surely Rebecca has some attachment to her grandmother? Rebecca has always been sentimental about Eleanor, Jennifer said dismissively. She doesn't understand that maintaining proper social standing sometimes requires difficult decisions. Eleanor lost everything in that investment scandal a few years ago, and frankly, she's become quite the charity case. I couldn't risk having our friends see us associated with that level of, well, failure. I felt physically sick listening to my daughter discuss me like I was some shameful burden she was forced to bear. The casual cruelty in her voice, the complete dismissal of my worth as a human being, was devastating beyond anything I'd imagined. But the conversation wasn't over. Mrs. Wellington's next question made everything even worse. Does Rebecca know about the seating arrangement? I'd hate for there to be any drama on her special day. Jennifer's laugh was sharp and calculating. Rebecca thinks Eleanor chose to sit in the back because she's shy around fancy events. I may have encouraged that belief by mentioning how overwhelmed Eleanor gets at large social gatherings. Rebecca is so trusting, she believed me completely when I told her Eleanor specifically requested a quiet table away from the main action. The manipulation was breathtaking. Jennifer had not only humiliated me by seating me with the hired help, but she'd lied to Rebecca about my supposed preferences to cover her tracks. My granddaughter thought I wanted to sit in the back corner, that I was choosing to remove myself from her celebration rather than being forcibly excluded by her mother. How clever, Mrs. Wellington murmured approvingly. This way Rebecca doesn't have to feel guilty about her grandmother's circumstances, and you maintain the elegant atmosphere you've worked so hard to create. Exactly, Jennifer agreed. Eleanor will get to see the wedding, Rebecca won't be hurt by family drama, and our guests won't be subjected to uncomfortable reminders about financial instability. Everyone wins. Everyone except me, apparently. I'd been erased from my granddaughter's wedding day not through honest conversation or mutual agreement, but through lies and manipulation designed to protect Jennifer's social standing at the expense of my dignity and relationship with Rebecca. The video continued, showing the bridesmaids chatting and laughing as they got ready, but I could barely focus on anything else after hearing that devastating conversation. Jennifer had orchestrated my humiliation with cold calculation. then covered her tracks with lies that made me appear to be the one choosing isolation over participation in my granddaughter's joy. Jake stopped the recording and looked at me with genuine compassion. "Mrs. Hastings, I'm so sorry you had to hear that, but I felt you deserved to know the truth about what's really happening here today." I sat in stunned silence, processing the full scope of Jennifer's betrayal. It wasn't just about money or social status. It was about a level of cruelty I hadn't believed my own daughter was capable of. She'd stolen my place in Rebecca's wedding day through manipulation and lies, then congratulated herself for handling a difficult situation with such clever discretion. "There's more," Jake said quietly. "Later in the recording, your daughter discusses some other things that I think you should know about. Things about Rebecca's relationship with you that aren't what they seem." I looked at him through my tears, wondering how much more devastating information I could handle in one day. But I needed to know the full truth, no matter how painful. "Show me," I whispered. He forwarded to another section of the recording, this one showing Rebecca getting into her wedding dress with help from her bridesmaids and Jennifer. The atmosphere was joyful and excited, but once again the conversation took a turn that made my stomach churn. "Rebecca, darling, are you sure you don't want to include a special moment with your grandmother in the ceremony?" asked Sarah, the maid of honor. "I know how close you two are." Rebecca's face showed a flicker of uncertainty. "I did think about asking Grandma Ellie to walk me down the aisle, but Mom explained that it might be too overwhelming for her. Grandma's been through so much with losing Grandpa, and all the financial stress. Mom thinks it's better if I don't put that kind of pressure on her." Jennifer jumped in smoothly, her voice full of false concern. "Eleanor is so fragile these days, Rebecca. The stress of being in front of all these people, of having that level of responsibility, could really be too much for her. I think she's much more comfortable just being able to enjoy the ceremony quietly from her seat. More lies, more manipulation designed to make Rebecca believe that excluding me was actually an act of kindness rather than calculated cruelty. Jennifer was poisoning my relationship with my granddaughter by making Rebecca think that including me would somehow hurt or overwhelm me." "I guess you're right," Rebecca said uncertainly. "I just want Grandma to know how much I love her, and how grateful I am for everything she's done for me." "Of course, sweetheart," Jennifer said smoothly, "and she knows that. You don't need grand gestures to prove your love. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let people participate in the way that's most comfortable for them." I wanted to scream at the screen, to somehow reach through that recording and tell Rebecca the truth about what was really happening. I wasn't fragile or overwhelmed. I was being systematically excluded and lied about by her mother, who was using fake concern for my well-being as a weapon to remove me from important moments in Rebecca's life. "Actually," Rebecca continued thoughtfully, "I was thinking about giving a special thank you speech during the reception. You know, acknowledging Grandpa Thomas and talking about how much Grandma Ellie means to me, how she taught me about resilience and grace and finding joy even when life gets hard." Jennifer's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, darling, I don't think that's a good idea. It might embarrass Eleanor to have that kind of public attention, especially given her current circumstances. And it could make some of the guests uncomfortable, having to think about difficult topics like financial loss and grief on such a happy day." "But I want people to know how amazing she is," Rebecca protested. "I want them to understand that losing money doesn't change who someone is at their core." "Rebecca, sweetheart," Jennifer said in the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child, "your wedding isn't the right venue for making social statements about wealth inequality. You'll make your guests feel awkward and put Eleanor in an impossible position. Trust me, the kindest thing is to let this day be about celebration, not about drawing attention to family hardships." I watched my granddaughter's face fall as she absorbed her mother's words. Rebecca was naturally kind-hearted and considerate, qualities that Jennifer was now using against both of us. By framing my inclusion as potentially embarrassing or uncomfortable for me, Jennifer was ensuring that Rebecca would exclude me out of love rather than cruelty. "I suppose you're right," Rebecca said reluctantly. "I just want everyone to know how much she means to me." "And they will, by seeing how lovely and poised and grateful you are," Jennifer assured her. "You're honoring Eleanor by being the kind of woman she helped raise. That's worth more than any speech." The manipulation was masterful and completely evil. Jennifer was convincing Rebecca that the best way to honor me was to not honor me at all, that love meant exclusion, that kindness required erasure. She was stealing not just my place at the wedding, but my granddaughter's natural instinct to include and celebrate me. Jake stopped the recording again, and I realized I was shaking with a combination of rage and grief. "Mrs. Hastings, are you okay? Should I get you some water?" "I'm not okay," I said honestly, my voice barely controlled. "But I need to see the rest. I need to know everything." He nodded and forwarded to another section. This time, the recording showed Jennifer talking privately with Richard, Rebecca's stepfather, as they prepared for the ceremony. "How did the seating situation work out?" Richard asked quietly. "Perfectly," Jennifer replied with satisfaction. "Eleanor is tucked away in the back where she can't cause any problems, and Rebecca thinks it was Eleanor's choice. Everyone's happy." "What about later?" Richard pressed. "Rebecca's going to want to spend time with her grandmother at some point during the reception." Jennifer waved dismissively. "I'll handle that too. I'll make sure Eleanor understands that Rebecca is too busy with wedding obligations to socialize much. A quick hello, maybe a photo, and then Eleanor can slip away quietly. No drama, no awkward conversations about money or circumstances." "You've thought of everything," Richard said admiringly. "I have to," Jennifer replied. "Managing family relationships is like managing any other social situation. You have to think 3 steps ahead and control the narrative before problems develop. Control the narrative." That phrase hit me like a lightning bolt, because it revealed the full scope of what Jennifer had been doing to me, probably for years. She hadn't just decided to humiliate me at Rebecca's wedding. She'd been systematically managing my relationship with my granddaughter, controlling the narrative about who I was and what I was capable of, gradually erasing me from family moments while making it seem like natural consequences of my circumstances, rather than deliberate exclusion. How many phone calls had Jennifer intercepted or discouraged? How many invitations had she prevented Rebecca from extending? How many opportunities to be involved in my granddaughter's life had been stolen from me through Jennifer's careful narrative management? The final section of the recording Jake showed me was the most devastating of all. It was Jennifer talking with Mrs. Wellington again, this time after the ceremony had concluded and they were preparing for the reception. "I have to say, Jennifer, your mother-in-law seems quite docile," Mrs. Wellington observed. "I was expecting some sort of dramatic scene when she saw the seating arrangement." Jennifer laughed coldly. "Eleanor has been thoroughly conditioned over the past few years. She knows her place in this family now." The investment scandal broke her spirit completely. She's grateful for whatever scraps of fusion we throw her way. Conditioned, like I was some sort of animal being trained to accept mistreatment. The casual cruelty of that word choice revealed everything about how Jennifer really viewed me. "How sad," Mrs. Wellington said, though her tone suggested she found it more convenient than tragic. "But I suppose it makes family management much easier for you." "Oh, absolutely," Jennifer agreed. "Eleanor used to be quite assertive, always offering opinions and trying to be involved in everything. The financial devastation really humbled her. Now she's just grateful to be included at all, even marginally." They were talking about me like I was a broken-down piece of furniture that they'd found a corner to store in. Not a human being with feelings and dignity, not the woman who'd raised Jennifer and helped shape the person she'd become, but a problem that had been successfully managed and contained. "What about Rebecca?" Mrs. Wellington asked. "Will she eventually see through the narrative you've created?" Jennifer shrugged. "Rebecca is kind-hearted but naive. She sees what I want her to see. As long as I frame everything in terms of protecting Eleanor's feelings or respecting her limitations, Rebecca will go along with whatever arrangements I make. She trusts me to handle family dynamics appropriately." The conversation ended there, but the damage was complete. I now understood that I wasn't just being humiliated at a wedding. I was the victim of a long-term campaign of psychological manipulation designed to gradually remove me from my granddaughter's life while making both Rebecca and me believe it was somehow in everyone's best interest. Jake turned off the recording and looked at me with deep concern. "Mrs. Hastings, I am so sorry you had to hear all of that. but I felt you deserved to know the truth about what's been happening to you. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the full scope of Jennifer's betrayal. This wasn't just about social embarrassment or maintaining appearances. This was systematic emotional abuse designed to isolate me from the person I loved most in the world. Jennifer had been slowly poisoning my relationship with Rebecca, using my financial circumstances as a weapon to gradually erase me from family moments and important milestones. "Thank you," I finally said to Jake, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "Thank you for showing me this. It hurts more than I can describe, but I needed to know the truth." "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. I looked across the reception hall at my daughter, elegant and poised as she chatted with wealthy guests, accepting congratulations on the beautiful wedding she'd orchestrated. I looked at Rebecca, radiant and happy as she danced with her new husband, trusting and innocent of the manipulation that had shaped this entire day. And I thought about Thomas, my beloved husband who'd always believed that truth and dignity were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. "I'm going to tell Rebecca everything," I said quietly. "She deserves to know the truth about what her mother has been doing. And then I'm going to decide whether this family is worth fighting for, or whether it's time to walk away with whatever dignity I have left." Jake nodded approvingly. "Good for you, Mrs. Hastings. Nobody deserves to be treated the way you've been treated today." As I sat at that humiliating table in the back corner of my granddaughter's wedding reception, holding the devastating truth about my daughter's cruelty, I realized that this moment was going to define the rest of my life. I could continue to accept the role of the grateful, diminished woman who was thankful for whatever scraps of inclusion she was thrown, or I could find the strength to fight back against the lies and manipulation that had stolen so much from me already. The choice was mine. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The reception was winding down when I finally found the courage to approach Rebecca. She was standing near the dessert table, laughing with a group of her college friends, her wedding dress still pristine despite hours of celebration. The sight of her genuine happiness made what I was about to do even more difficult, but I knew I couldn't let another day pass living with these lies. "Rebecca, sweetheart," I said softly, touching her arm. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Her face lit up when she saw me, and the pure joy in her expression nearly broke my resolve. "Grandma Ellie, I've been looking for you all evening. Did you enjoy the ceremony? Wasn't it magical?" "It was beautiful, honey. You looked absolutely radiant." I glanced around at her friends, who were politely pretending not to listen to our conversation. "Could we perhaps step outside for just a few minutes? I have something important I need to discuss with you." Rebecca's smile faltered slightly at my serious tone, but she nodded. "Of course. Let me just tell Marcus where I'm going." She excused herself from her friends and found her new husband near the bar, whispering something in his ear before returning to me. "Okay, Grandma, let's go outside." We walked through the elegant French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking the manor's gardens. The mountain air was cool and fresh after the warm reception hall, and fairy lights strung through the trees created a romantic ambiance that seemed to mock the difficult conversation we were about to have. "Grandma, you seem upset," Rebecca said, taking my hands in hers. "Did something happen? I know today has been overwhelming with so many people and all the excitement." Her concern for my well-being, her automatic assumption that I might be overwhelmed rather than deliberately hurt, showed how completely Jennifer's manipulation had worked. Rebecca genuinely believed that I was fragile and easily overwhelmed, that excluding me from important moments was an act of kindness rather than cruelty. "Rebecca, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear," I began carefully. "But I need you to know the truth about what happened here today, and about some things that have been happening in our family for quite some time." She frowned, clearly confused. "What do you mean? What truth?" I pulled out my phone, where Jake had sent me copies of the recordings. "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to something. It's going to hurt, and I'm sorry for that, but you deserve to know what your mother has been saying and doing." "My mother?" Rebecca's voice rose in surprise. "Grandma, what are you talking about? Mom has been nothing but supportive and helpful with the wedding planning." "Please, just listen," I said gently, pressing play on the first recording. Rebecca's face went through a series of emotions as she heard her mother's voice describing me as, quote, "financially embarrassing," and explaining how she'd manipulated the seating arrangement to hide me from the other guests. At first she looked confused, then shocked, then increasingly horrified as the full scope of Jennifer's deception became clear. "That's not... She wouldn't," Rebecca stammered, but her voice trailed off as the recording continued, revealing Jennifer's lies about my supposed preferences and her calculated manipulation of Rebecca's natural kindness. When the recording ended, Rebecca stood in stunned silence, staring at my phone as if it might suddenly reveal that what she'd heard was some sort of mistake or misunderstanding. "There's more," I said quietly, playing the section where Jennifer discussed conditioning me and managing my relationship with Rebecca. By the time all the recordings had played, Rebecca was crying openly, her carefully applied wedding makeup streaking down her cheeks. "Grandma, I had no idea. I thought... She told me you wanted to sit in the back because you got nervous in crowds. She said you specifically asked not to be put in a prominent position because it would stress you out. I know, sweetheart. She's been very careful to make you think that excluding me was actually protecting me." "But why?" Rebecca's voice broke with anguish. "Why would she do this to you, to us? She's been lying to me about you for who knows how long." I sat down on a stone bench, feeling suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything I'd discovered. "Because I'm an embarrassment to her now, Rebecca. When your grandfather and I lost our money, I stopped being the kind of mother she could be proud of. I became a reminder that financial security isn't guaranteed, and that made her wealthy friends uncomfortable." Rebecca sank down beside me, her elaborate wedding dress pooling around her feet. "This is horrible. I can't believe she's been manipulating both of us like this. All those times I wanted to include you in things and she convinced me it would be too much for you." "Like what?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "The engagement party," Rebecca said immediately. "I wanted you to help plan it, to be involved in all the preparations. But Mom said you'd feel out of place with her friends, that it would be kinder to let you enjoy the party as a guest rather than putting pressure on you to host." Another stolen moment, another opportunity for involvement that had been reframed as burden rather than joy. "And last Christmas," Rebecca continued, her voice getting stronger with anger, "I wanted to have Christmas dinner at your apartment, to see how you decorated for the holidays and spend time in your space. But Mom said your place was too small for a family gathering, that it would embarrass you to have us see how you're living now." I remembered that Christmas, spent alone in my studio apartment while Rebecca celebrated with Jennifer's family at their mansion. I'd told myself it was natural for young people to want elaborate celebrations, but the truth was that Rebecca had wanted to include me, and Jennifer had prevented it. "She's been stealing our relationship," Rebecca said, her voice filled with dawning realization. "Making decisions about what I should think and feel about you, controlling when and how we interact. I've been hurting you without even knowing it. You didn't know, sweetheart. You trusted your mother to guide you, which is what daughters are supposed to do. But I should have questioned it more," Rebecca insisted. "I should have asked you directly what you wanted, instead of letting her speak for you. I should have noticed that you seemed sad sometimes when I'd cancel visits or change plans." We sat together in silence for a few minutes, both processing the enormity of what had been revealed. The sounds of the reception continued inside, guests laughing and dancing and celebrating, oblivious to the family drama unfolding on the terrace. "Grandma?" Rebecca said finally. "I want to make this right. I want to go back in there and tell everyone the truth about what happened today. I want to publicly acknowledge you and explain why you're sitting where you are." "Rebecca, no," I said firmly. "This is your wedding day. You're not going to create a scene that will overshadow your celebration or embarrass your new in-laws." "But what Mom did is unforgivable," Rebecca protested. "She humiliated you and lied to me. She stole this day from both of us." "Yes, she did. But making a scene now won't give us back what was taken. It will only create more pain and drama." Rebecca looked frustrated, but she could see the wisdom in my words. "Then what do we do? How do we handle this?" I stood up from the bench, feeling a strength I hadn't experienced in years. "We handle it by refusing to let her control our relationship anymore. We make our own decisions about how and when we want to spend time together. We don't let her filter our conversations or manage our interactions." "Yes," Rebecca said immediately. "I want that. I want to have a real relationship with you, not whatever manufactured version Mom has been allowing." But Rebecca, you need to understand that this is going to change everything with your mother. Once you start questioning her narrative about me, once you start making independent decisions about our relationship, she's going to fight back. She's going to try to convince you that I'm manipulating you, or that I'm being dramatic about what happened. Rebecca's jaw set with determination that reminded me of myself at her age. Let her try. I've heard her own words, Grandma. I know exactly what she thinks of you and how she's been treating you. Nothing she says can make me unhear what I heard on those recordings. I'm proud of you for being willing to stand up for what's right, I told her. But I need you to be prepared for the fact that your mother is very good at manipulation. She's going to try to make you feel guilty for choosing me over her, or she'll claim that I've turned you against her. Then what do you think we should do? I considered this carefully. Jennifer had shown herself to be calculating and ruthless when it came to protecting her social standing. A direct confrontation might only result in her finding more subtle ways to sabotage my relationship with Rebecca. I think we start by building a strong, independent relationship between us, I said finally. We communicate directly with each other instead of through your mother. We make plans together without her input or approval. We establish that you and I can have a relationship that doesn't require her permission or management. I want that, Rebecca said firmly. I want to know who you really are, not the fragile, overwhelmed version Mom has been showing me. And I want to know who you really are too, sweetheart. The woman you've become, your hopes and dreams and opinions, not just the carefully curated updates your mother has been sharing with me. We hugged then, a real embrace between two women who were choosing to see each other clearly for the first time in years. Rebecca's wedding dress was elaborate and expensive, but underneath all the finery, she was still the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask me to tell her stories about when her daddy was young. There's something else we need to discuss, I said as we broke apart. Jake, the photographer, was the one who brought these recordings to my attention. He felt I deserved to know the truth about what was being said about me. That young man showed me more kindness today than my own daughter did. I need to thank him, Rebecca said immediately. And I need to make sure he includes you properly in all the wedding photos. I want pictures of us together, real pictures where you're not hidden in the background. I'd like that very much. We walked back toward the reception hall, but before we reached the doors, Rebecca stopped suddenly. Grandma, I have an idea. It's probably crazy, but I want to try something. What kind of something? I want to give that speech I mentioned in the bridal suite. The one where I thank you publicly and tell everyone what you mean to me. Mom convinced me not to do it, but now I understand why. She didn't want people to see how important you are to me. I felt a thrill of fear mixed with excitement. Rebecca, that's a lovely thought, but it might create exactly the kind of drama we just agreed to avoid. Or it might be the perfect way to reclaim this day, she countered. To make it clear to everyone, including Mom, that you are an important part of my life and that I'm proud of our relationship. What about your new in-laws? What about maintaining the elegant atmosphere your mother worked so hard to create? Rebecca's eyes flashed with something that looked like rebellion. Grandma, I just learned that my mother has been systematically lying to me and emotionally abusing you for years. I'm not particularly concerned about maintaining her elegant atmosphere anymore. I could see she was serious about this, and part of me was thrilled at the idea of being publicly acknowledged and honored by my granddaughter. But another part of me worried about the consequences. If you do this, there's no taking it back, I warned her. Your mother is going to be furious, and she's going to find ways to make both of us pay for embarrassing her in front of her friends. Good, Rebecca said fiercely. Maybe it's time she faced some consequences for her behavior. Before I could respond, the French doors opened, and Marcus appeared, looking concerned. There you are, he said to Rebecca. Your mother is looking for you. She wants to start the cake-cutting ceremony. Rebecca and I exchanged glances. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus, Rebecca said slowly, I need to tell you something important. Something about what's been happening with my family that I just learned about. Marcus looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Okay. What's going on? Rebecca quickly explained what she'd discovered, playing portions of the recordings for her new husband. Marcus's expression grew increasingly dark as he listened to Jennifer's casual cruelty and calculated manipulation. "That's unacceptable," he said when the recordings ended. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I had no idea your grandmother was being treated this way." "I didn't either," Rebecca said. "But now I do, and I want to make it right." "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked, and I was struck by how automatically he supported his wife's decision to stand up for what was right. "I want to give a speech during the cake cutting," Rebecca said. "I want to publicly thank my grandmother and make it clear how important she is to me." Marcus nodded without hesitation. "Then that's what we'll do." His immediate support gave Rebecca the final boost of confidence she needed. "Okay, let's go do this." We walked back into the reception hall together, the three of us united in purpose. The atmosphere inside was still festive. Guests were chatting and laughing as they waited for the cake-cutting ceremony to begin. Jennifer stood near the elaborate three-tier wedding cake, directing the photographer and making sure everything was positioned perfectly for the traditional photos. "There you are," Jennifer called out when she saw us approaching. "We're ready to start the cake cutting. Rebecca, you and Marcus need to stand here, and the photographer will capture everything from this angle." "Actually, Mom," Rebecca said, her voice steady and clear, "before we cut the cake, I want to say something to our guests." Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't think that's necessary. The photographer has everything timed perfectly, and we don't want to delay the schedule." "It's important to me," Rebecca said firmly. "And it's my wedding." Something in Rebecca's tone made Jennifer look more closely at her daughter's face. "Rebecca, is everything all right? You look like you've been crying." "I'm fine, Mom, but I have something I need to say." Marcus stepped forward and signaled to the band leader, who stopped the music and announced that the bride wanted to address her guests. The reception hall gradually quieted as people turned their attention toward Rebecca. I felt my heart pounding as I realized there was no stopping this now. Whatever happened next was going to change everything for our family, for better or worse. Rebecca took the microphone with steady hands, though I could see the determination mixed with nervousness in her expression. She looked out over the room full of well-dressed guests, then found my eyes across the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate this incredible milestone with Marcus and me," she began, her voice strong and clear. "Your presence has made this day truly special." Jennifer was standing to the side, smiling that practiced social smile, but I could see the tension in her posture as she waited to hear what Rebecca was going to say. "When people ask me about the most important influences in my life," Rebecca continued, "I always talk about the woman who taught me that strength isn't about how much money you have or what kind of car you drive. It's about how you handle adversity, how you treat people who can't do anything for you, and how you maintain your dignity even when life knocks you down." I saw Jennifer's face beginning to change as she realized where this speech was heading. "That woman is my grandmother, Eleanor Hastings," Rebecca said, gesturing toward where I stood near the back of the room. "Many of you probably haven't had the chance to meet her tonight because she's been seated in the back of the room. Not because she wanted to be there, but because she was placed there." A murmur went through the crowd as guests began to understand that something unusual was happening. This wasn't a typical wedding speech. My grandmother lost everything in a financial scandal that destroyed her retirement savings and cost her the life she'd built with my grandfather. Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger. "She went from being comfortable and secure to struggling to make ends meet almost overnight. And instead of becoming bitter or resentful, she handled that devastating loss with more grace and dignity than I've ever seen from anyone." Jennifer's face had gone white, but she couldn't interrupt without creating exactly the kind of scene she'd been trying to avoid all day. "But here's what some people in my family decided," Rebecca said, and her voice took on a harder edge. "They decided that because my grandmother's financial circumstances had changed, she was somehow less worthy of respect and inclusion. They decided that her presence at family events was embarrassing, that she should be hidden away, so as not to make other people uncomfortable with reminders that financial security isn't guaranteed." The reception hall had gone completely silent now. Guests were looking uncomfortable, unsure of what they were witnessing but clearly understanding that family secrets were being aired in public. Today, on my wedding day, my grandmother was deliberately seated with the catering staff in the back corner of this room, Rebecca announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the hall. She was told this was her choice, that she preferred to sit away from the main celebration. But that was a lie. She was hidden away because someone in my family was ashamed of her financial circumstances. I could see people throughout the room turning to look toward my table in the back, their faces showing shock and dismay as they realized what had happened. My grandmother is the woman who helped raise me, Rebecca continued. She's the one who taught me to bake, who read me bedtime stories, who showed up to every school play and soccer game. She's the one who showed me what unconditional love looks like, and she deserved to be honored at this celebration, not hidden away like some shameful secret. Jennifer finally found her voice. Rebecca, this isn't appropriate, she said sharply, though she was trying to keep her voice low. This is not the time or place for family drama. Rebecca turned to face her mother directly. You're right, Mom. Family drama shouldn't happen at weddings. Grandmothers shouldn't be humiliated and lied about on their granddaughter's wedding day. But here we are. The confrontation was happening in front of hundreds of guests, and I could see people pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a viral-worthy moment. Grandma Ellie, Rebecca called out, looking directly at me. Would you please come up here and stand with me where you belong? Every eye in the room turned toward me as I made my way through the crowd toward the front of the room. The guests parted to let me pass, and I could hear whispered conversations as people processed what they were witnessing. When I reached Rebecca's side, she immediately put her arm around me and pulled me close. This is my grandmother, she announced to the room. She is not an embarrassment. She is not a burden. She is one of the strongest, most loving women I know, and I am proud to be her granddaughter. The applause that followed was immediate and sustained. Guests throughout the room were clapping enthusiastically, many of them looking moved by Rebecca's speech and clearly supportive of her decision to publicly honor me. But not everyone was applauding. Jennifer stood frozen near the cake table, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Several of her wealthy friends were looking uncomfortable, whispering among themselves about the unexpected turn the evening had taken. Mrs. Wellington, Marcus's mother, stepped forward with a warm smile. Mrs. Hastings, she said, extending her hand to me. It's wonderful to finally meet you properly. Rebecca has told us so much about you. Other guests began approaching to introduce themselves, and I found myself surrounded by kind, welcoming people who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. It was a stark contrast to the isolation and humiliation I'd experienced earlier in the evening. Rebecca stayed close to my side, making sure I was included in every conversation and every photo opportunity. When the cake cutting finally happened, she insisted that I stand with the family members for all the traditional shots. Mrs. Hastings, Jake the photographer said as he positioned us for photos, I'm so glad to see you where you belong. Thank you, I whispered back. Thank you for everything you did today. As the evening continued, I noticed that Jennifer had essentially disappeared from the celebration. She was still present physically, but she'd withdrawn from active participation, standing on the sidelines with a group of her closest friends who seemed to be offering sympathy for the public embarrassment she'd endured. Mom's furious, Rebecca said quietly as we watched Jennifer from across the room. Are you having second thoughts about what you did? I asked. Not even for a second, Rebecca replied firmly. I'm only sorry it took me this long to see what was really happening. She's going to make this very difficult for you going forward, I warned. Jennifer doesn't forgive or forget when she feels she's been publicly humiliated. Then that's her choice, Rebecca said. I'm not going to live my life walking on eggshells around her anymore. I'm not going to let her control my relationships or manipulate my decisions. Marcus appeared at Rebecca's other side, having spent the last hour being introduced to me properly, and hearing stories about Rebecca's childhood that Jennifer had apparently never shared with him. Mrs. Hastings, he said warmly, Rebecca and I would love to have you visit us in Charleston once we get back from our honeymoon. We want you to see our home and meet my family properly. I'd love that, I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I'd love that very much. And we want to establish some new family traditions, Rebecca added, starting with having you over for Christmas dinner. At our house, where you'll be the guest of honor. The contrast between this moment and the isolation I'd felt just hours earlier was almost overwhelming. I'd gone from being hidden away like a shameful secret to being welcomed and celebrated as an important family member. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, pulling an envelope from her bouquet. "I wrote this for you earlier, before I knew about everything that had happened, but I think it's even more important now." She handed me a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Thank you for loving me unconditionally, even when others tried to come between us. You are my hero, and I promise to never let anyone diminish your importance in my life again. With all my love, Rebecca." As I read those words, I realized that Jennifer's manipulation had ultimately failed. Despite years of careful narrative management and systematic exclusion, Rebecca's love for me had survived. Her natural kindness and sense of justice had prevailed over the lies and manipulation. The reception ended around midnight, with guests gradually departing after offering their congratulations and expressing their pleasure at meeting me. Several people made a point of telling me how much they'd enjoyed Rebecca's speech, and how moved they were by her decision to publicly honor our relationship. Jennifer left without speaking to any of us, sweeping out of the reception hall with Richard and a small group of her closest friends. Her exit was dramatic and pointed, designed to communicate her displeasure and her intention to make Rebecca pay for the public embarrassment. But Rebecca seemed unfazed by her mother's dramatic departure. She was glowing with happiness and satisfaction, clearly feeling liberated by her decision to finally speak the truth about what had been happening in our family. "Grandma," she said as we prepared to leave, "this isn't the wedding day I planned, but it's the wedding day I needed. Thank you for giving me the courage to see the truth and stand up for what's right." "Thank you for choosing love over manipulation," I replied. "Thank you for seeing me as I really am instead of accepting someone else's version of who I'm supposed to be." As I drove home through the dark mountain roads, I reflected on everything that had changed in the span of a single day. I'd started the morning as a woman who'd been systematically diminished and controlled, accepting crumbs of inclusion because I'd been convinced that was all I deserved. I was ending the day as a woman who'd reclaimed her dignity and her relationship with her granddaughter. The truth had been painful to discover, but it had also been liberating. Rebecca and I could now build a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and carefully managed narratives. Jennifer's cruelty had been exposed, and while there would undoubtedly be consequences for that exposure, I felt strong enough to handle whatever challenges lay ahead. I was no longer the isolated, diminished woman who'd been hidden away in the back corner of a wedding reception. I was Eleanor Hastings, a woman who'd survived devastating loss and emerged with her integrity intact. A woman whose granddaughter was proud to claim her, regardless of her financial circumstances. A woman who'd found the courage to demand the respect and love she deserved. The road ahead would not be easy. Jennifer would likely retaliate for the public humiliation she'd endured, and there would be family conflicts and difficult conversations in the months to come. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. Rebecca and I had each other now, truly had each other, without filters or manipulation or carefully managed interactions. We could build something real and lasting, something that no amount of wealth or social pressure could diminish. As I pulled into the parking lot of my modest apartment complex, I realized that I was no longer embarrassed by my circumstances. I was a woman who'd faced devastating loss and rebuilt her life with dignity and grace. That was something to be proud of, not ashamed of. The wedding had been a turning point, but not in the way Jennifer had intended. Instead of successfully hiding me away and maintaining her perfect social facade, she'd inadvertently created the circumstances that allowed the truth to finally emerge. And the truth, as painful as it had been to discover, had set us all free. The phone calls started 3 days after the wedding. The first came at 6 a.m, jarring me awake from the deepest sleep I'd had in months. I fumbled for my phone, expecting perhaps an emergency or wrong number, but Jennifer's name appeared on the screen. Eleanor. Her voice was ice cold, all pretense of maternal warmth completely gone. "I hope you're satisfied with the spectacle you created at my daughter's wedding." I sat up in bed, instantly alert despite the early hour. "Jennifer, I didn't create anything. I simply told Rebecca the truth about what you've been doing." "What I've been doing?" Her laugh was bitter and sharp. I've been protecting this family's reputation and managing difficult social situations. Something you clearly have no understanding of. You humiliated me at my own granddaughter's wedding and lied to her about my wishes, I said firmly, surprised by the strength in my own voice. That's not protection, Jennifer. That's cruelty. Cruelty? Jennifer's voice rose dangerously. Do you want to know what cruelty looks like, Eleanor? It's watching your daughter choose her embarrassing mother over her own family's well-being. It's having your friends call to express their sympathy for the public scene they witnessed. It's knowing that everything I've worked to build in this community has been damaged by your selfish need for attention. My selfish need for attention? I repeated, incredulous. Jennifer, you seated me with the catering staff and told your daughter I was too fragile to participate in her wedding ceremony. How is wanting basic dignity and respect selfish? Because you don't understand the bigger picture, Jennifer snapped. You don't understand what it's like to maintain a certain standard of living, to be part of a community where appearances matter. Your financial situation reflects poorly on all of us, and I was trying to manage that tactfully. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jennifer alternating between accusations of manipulation and threats about the consequences of my betrayal. She claimed that Rebecca was too young and naive to understand the complexities of adult relationships, that I had taken advantage of her emotional nature to turn her against her own mother. You've poisoned my daughter against me, Jennifer concluded. But this isn't over, Eleanor. Rebecca will see through your manipulation eventually, and when she does, you'll be completely alone. The line went dead, leaving me sitting in my small bedroom, shaking with a combination of anger and anxiety. I'd expected Jennifer to be upset about the public embarrassment, but the venom in her voice suggested this conflict was going to be far more serious than I'd anticipated. The second call came from Richard, Jennifer's husband, later that same morning. His approach was different, more diplomatic, but equally troubling. Eleanor, I think we need to have a conversation about what happened at the wedding, he began in his measured physician's voice. Jennifer is quite upset, as you can imagine. I'm sure she is, I replied. But Richard, you heard those recordings. You know what she was saying about me, how she was manipulating the situation. I understand that you felt hurt by the seating arrangement, Richard said carefully. But don't you think a private conversation would have been more appropriate than a public confrontation? You've put Rebecca in a very difficult position with her mother. Rebecca deserved to know the truth about how she was being manipulated, I said. Jennifer wasn't just hiding me away, Richard. She was systematically lying to Rebecca about my wishes and my capabilities. Jennifer was trying to manage a complex social situation, Richard replied, echoing his wife's earlier justification. These events require careful planning and consideration of how various elements will be perceived by the community. Various elements? I repeated, feeling the sting of being reduced to a problematic component of event planning. Richard, I'm not an element to be managed. I'm Rebecca's grandmother and your mother-in-law. I deserved basic respect and inclusion. The conversation with Richard was more civil than the one with Jennifer, but equally disappointing. He clearly saw Jennifer's behavior as unfortunate but understandable, while viewing my response as dramatic and disruptive. There was no acknowledgement that what Jennifer had done was fundamentally wrong, only concern about the social fallout from my decision to expose it. Over the next week, the calls continued from various family members and friends. Jennifer had clearly launched a campaign to control the narrative about what had happened at the wedding, painting herself as the victim of my manipulation, and Rebecca as an innocent caught in the middle of adult drama. Jennifer's sister Margaret called to express her concern about the family rift I had created. Eleanor, I know you've been through a difficult time since Thomas died, but don't you think you're being a bit dramatic about the seating situation? Jennifer was just trying to make sure everyone was comfortable. Jennifer's mother, Rebecca's great-grandmother, called with a similar message. Dear, I understand you felt slighted, but families need to stick together. This public confrontation has created unnecessary drama that could have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Each conversation followed the same pattern. My feelings were acknowledged as understandable, but ultimately invalid, while Jennifer's behavior was framed as well-intentioned management of a difficult situation. The systematic lying, the deliberate humiliation, the calculated manipulation of Rebecca's emotions, all of that was glossed over in favor of focusing on my inappropriate response to being mistreated. What struck me most was how completely Jennifer had succeeded in controlling the narrative, even after the truth had been exposed. She'd managed to position herself as the wronged party, the victim of an embarrassing outburst, rather than the perpetrator of months or years of emotional abuse. But not everyone was buying into Jennifer's version of events. Jake Morrison, the photographer, called me 4 days after the wedding, with information that would prove crucial in the weeks to come. "Mrs. Hastings, I wanted you to know that I've been contacted by several news outlets about what happened at the wedding," he said. "Apparently, some of the guests recorded Rebecca's speech and posted it on social media. It's going viral." I felt a chill of apprehension. "What kind of attention is it getting?" "Overwhelmingly positive," Jake assured me. "People are praising Rebecca for standing up for you and criticizing the kind of financial discrimination you experienced. But there's something else you should know. I've had 2 other families contact me after seeing this story, families who say they've experienced similar situations, with elderly relatives being excluded or hidden away due to financial circumstances." This was something I hadn't anticipated. The story of what happened at Rebecca's wedding was resonating with people far beyond our immediate family, apparently touching on a broader issue of how society treats elderly people who've experienced financial setbacks. One woman told me her mother-in-law was uninvited from her son's graduation party because the family was embarrassed about her living in a mobile home, Jake continued. Another family admitted they've been excluding a grandfather from family gatherings because he can't afford to contribute to the expensive restaurants and activities they prefer. The realization that our family drama had exposed a much larger social problem was both validating and overwhelming. I wasn't the only person who'd been deemed too financially embarrassing to include in family celebrations. There were others out there, other elderly people who'd been systematically excluded and diminished because their economic circumstances made their families uncomfortable. "I wanted to ask your permission to do something," Jake said. "I'm working on a photo essay about financial discrimination against elderly family members. Would you be willing to be interviewed for the project? Your story could help other people who are going through similar situations." The idea of going public with my story beyond the accidental viral moment at the wedding was both terrifying and appealing. Part of me wanted to retreat back into privacy and try to rebuild my family relationships quietly. But another part of me recognized that Jennifer's behavior toward me was part of a larger pattern of elder abuse that needed to be addressed. "Let me think about it," I told Jake. "This is all very overwhelming." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Mrs. Hastings, you should know that what happened to you was wrong, and your decision to stand up for yourself has already helped more people than you realize." Meanwhile, my relationship with Rebecca was flourishing in ways I hadn't experienced in years. She called me every day, sometimes multiple times, as if she was trying to make up for all the filtered and managed conversations Jennifer had allowed between us. "Grandma, I keep thinking about all the times Mom convinced me not to include you in things," Rebecca said during one of our long phone conversations. "I wanted to have you help me shop for my wedding dress, but she said it would be too overwhelming for you to see all the expensive options you couldn't afford. I wanted you at my bridal shower, but she said it would be awkward because you wouldn't know any of the other guests." Each revelation was another piece of the puzzle, showing how systematically Jennifer had worked to isolate me from important moments in Rebecca's life while making Rebecca believe she was protecting me from stress or embarrassment. "I've been such an idiot," Rebecca said, her voice heavy with regret. "I let her make all these decisions for me, instead of trusting my own instincts about what I wanted." "You weren't an idiot, sweetheart," I assured her. "You were trusting your mother to guide you, which is natural and healthy. The problem wasn't your trust, it was her abuse of that trust." "But I should have questioned it more," Rebecca insisted, "especially when my gut was telling me something was wrong. Like when you seemed sad at family gatherings, or when you'd make comments about not wanting to be a burden. I thought you were just being modest, but now I realize you were responding to the way you were actually being treated." The conversations with Rebecca were healing but also painful, as we both came to understand the full scope of what had been lost to Jennifer's manipulation. Years of potential closeness, shared experiences, and honest communication had been stolen from us by someone who claimed to be protecting us both. "I want to make up for lost time," Rebecca said. "I want to know everything about you that Mom never told me. I want to understand what your life has really been like since Grandpa died." So I told her. I explained about the financial devastation, the stress of losing everything I'd worked for, the shame of having to start over at 70. But I also told her about the strength I'd discovered in myself, the way I'd learned to find joy in simple things, the pride I'd developed in surviving such a devastating blow with my dignity intact. "You're incredible," Rebecca said after hearing about how I'd rebuilt my life from nothing. "I can't believe Mom made me think you were fragile and overwhelmed. You're one of the strongest people I've ever known." "Strength looks different when you don't have money to cushion it," I replied. "Your mother equates strength with financial security. She can't understand that losing everything sometimes reveals strengths you didn't know you had." Our conversations weren't limited to the past. Rebecca wanted to know about my current life, my daily routines, my hopes for the future. She was horrified to learn how isolated I'd become, how few social connections I'd maintained after the financial scandal. "That changes now," she declared. "I want you to be actively involved in my life, and I want to be actively involved in yours. No more managed interactions through Mom. No more filtered information." True to her word, Rebecca began including me in her life in ways that Jennifer had apparently been preventing for years. She invited me to visit her and Marcus in Charleston, not for a brief, supervised visit, but for a full week where I could really get to know her husband and see how they lived. The visit to Charleston was revelatory. Marcus was genuinely warm and welcoming, clearly delighted to finally have the opportunity to build a real relationship with his wife's grandmother. He showed me around their beautiful home, introduced me to their friends, and included me in their social activities without any apparent concern about my modest circumstances. "Rebecca talks about you constantly," Marcus told me during a quiet moment on their garden patio. "She's always quoting things you taught her or mentioning lessons you shared with her. It's clear how much you mean to her. It means everything to me to hear that," I said. I was beginning to think my influence on her life had been completely erased. "Not even close," Marcus assured me. "If anything, Rebecca's relationship with you is one of the things I admire most about her. The way she talks about your strength and resilience, the way she applies lessons you taught her to challenges in her own life, it's beautiful to witness." During that week in Charleston, I got to see Rebecca as the woman she'd become, rather than the carefully curated version Jennifer had allowed me to know. She was confident and accomplished, but also kind and thoughtful in ways that reminded me of the little girl I'd helped raise. She'd maintained the values I'd tried to instill in her despite Jennifer's attempts to reshape her priorities around wealth and social status. "Grandma, I want to ask you something," Rebecca said one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset. "I want to know if you'd consider moving to Charleston, not to live with us, but to live near us. I want you to be part of our daily lives, not just someone we see occasionally." The offer was tempting beyond words. Charleston was beautiful. Rebecca and Marcus were clearly sincere in their desire to include me in their lives, and the prospect of having family nearby after years of isolation was incredibly appealing. "But what about your mother?" I asked. "Jennifer isn't going to approve of that arrangement, and I don't want to create ongoing conflict in your marriage or your family relationships. Mom doesn't get to approve or disapprove of my relationship with you anymore," Rebecca said firmly. "She lost that privilege when she decided to lie to both of us for years. Marcus and I have discussed this extensively, and we're both committed to having you be a real part of our family. What does Jennifer say about that decision?" Rebecca's expression darkened. "Mom and I aren't speaking right now. She's demanded that I choose between her and you, and I've made it clear that I'm not going to be manipulated that way. She can accept that you're important to me and treat you with respect, or she can continue this dramatic conflict. But I'm not going to sacrifice my relationship with you to appease her social anxieties." The break between Rebecca and Jennifer was painful to contemplate, despite everything Jennifer had done. I'd never wanted my granddaughter to have to choose between family members, and I worried about the long-term consequences of this rift. "Rebecca, I don't want to be the reason you lose your relationship with your mother," I said carefully. "Maybe there's a way to rebuild bridges and find some middle ground." "Grandma, you didn't create this situation," Rebecca replied. Mom created it with years of manipulation and lies. I'm not choosing you over her. I'm choosing honesty over manipulation, respect over control. If she can't accept that, then she's the one making the choice to continue this conflict. While Rebecca and I were rebuilding our relationship, Jennifer was escalating her campaign to isolate me from the rest of the family. She'd apparently convinced several family members that I was manipulating Rebecca and using emotional blackmail to turn her against her mother. The accusations were sophisticated and calculated. Jennifer claimed that I was taking advantage of Rebecca's kind nature and guilt-tripping her about my financial circumstances. She suggested that my decision to expose the wedding situation publicly was evidence of manipulative behavior designed to garner sympathy and attention. She's always been dramatic, Jennifer told anyone who would listen. Even when she was married to Thomas, she had a tendency to play the victim when things didn't go her way. The financial problems just gave her a new excuse to seek attention and pity. This revisionist history of my character and behavior was particularly painful because it attacked not just my current actions but my entire identity, as Jennifer had known it. She was rewriting decades of family history to support her narrative that I was the problem rather than the victim. Some family members were buying into Jennifer's version of events, particularly those who had their own reasons to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about wealth, family dynamics, and the treatment of elderly relatives. It was easier to believe that I was being manipulative than to acknowledge that Jennifer's behavior had been systematically cruel. But others were beginning to ask harder questions. Margaret, Jennifer's sister, called me after several weeks of listening to Jennifer's complaints about my manipulation of Rebecca. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something directly," Margaret said. "Jennifer keeps saying that you're guilt-tripping Rebecca about your financial situation and making her feel responsible for taking care of you. Is that true?" "Margaret, I've never asked Rebecca for money or financial assistance," I replied honestly. "I've never made her feel responsible for my circumstances or suggested that she owes me anything because of what I've been through." "Then why is Jennifer so convinced that you're manipulating the situation?" "Because Jennifer can't accept that Rebecca might choose to include me in her life simply because she loves me and values our relationship," I said. "Jennifer sees every family interaction through the lens of manipulation and control, because that's how she operates. She can't understand that Rebecca and I might have a genuine, honest relationship that doesn't require management or mediation." The conversation with Margaret was a turning point, because it revealed that Jennifer's version of events wasn't holding up under scrutiny. People who took the time to ask direct questions and listen to actual facts rather than Jennifer's emotional manipulations were beginning to see through her narrative. Meanwhile, the viral video of Rebecca's wedding speech was continuing to generate attention and support from unexpected quarters. A local television station in Atlanta contacted me about doing a feature story on elder financial discrimination within families. "Mrs. Hastings, we've been researching this issue since your granddaughter's wedding speech went viral," the producer explained. "We've found that financial abuse and exclusion of elderly family members is much more common than most people realize. Would you be willing to share your story to help raise awareness about this problem?" The decision to go public with my story beyond the accidental viral moment was difficult. Part of me wanted to maintain privacy and try to rebuild family relationships quietly. But I was increasingly convinced that what had happened to me was part of a larger pattern that needed to be addressed. "What would this involve?" I asked. "An on-camera interview where you'd tell your story. And we'd also include expert commentary from social workers and elder advocates about the broader issue of financial discrimination against elderly family members." I asked for time to think about it, and spent several days weighing the potential benefits against the risks. Going public would almost certainly make reconciliation with Jennifer even more difficult, but it might help other families avoid the kind of systematic manipulation and exclusion I'd experienced. The decision was made easier when I received a letter from a woman in Tennessee who'd seen the wedding video online. She wrote about her own experience being excluded from family events after losing her home in a medical bankruptcy, and how isolated and ashamed she'd felt until seeing Rebecca's speech. "Your story gave me the courage to have an honest conversation with my daughter about how I've been feeling," she wrote. "We discovered that she'd been making assumptions about what I could afford and what I wanted to participate in, rather than asking me directly. We're rebuilding our relationship now, but it never would have happened if you hadn't shown me that it was okay to speak up for myself." That letter, and several others like it, convinced me that my personal family drama had accidentally become something larger and more important. If sharing my story could help other elderly people avoid the isolation and manipulation I'd experienced, then the potential damage to my relationship with Jennifer was a price worth paying. I called the television producer back and agreed to do the interview. The process was intimidating but empowering. For the first time in years, I was able to tell my story completely and honestly, without worrying about how it would be filtered or reinterpreted by someone else. The story aired 2 weeks later, and generated an even bigger response than I'd anticipated. The television station received hundreds of calls and emails from viewers sharing their own experiences with elder financial discrimination or expressing support for my decision to speak out. But the most meaningful response came from Rebecca, who called me immediately after the story aired. "Grandma, I just watched your interview, and I am so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were articulate and dignified and powerful. Watching you tell your story made me even more certain that I made the right choice in standing up for you at the wedding." "Thank you, sweetheart. I was nervous about going public, but I felt like other people needed to hear that this kind of treatment isn't acceptable." "You're going to help so many families," Rebecca said, "and you're going to help other elderly people find the courage to demand better treatment from their families." The television interview also had an unexpected consequence. Dr. Patricia Wellington, Marcus's mother, called me the day after it aired with an apology that caught me completely off guard. "Mrs. Hastings, I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I was in that bridal suite when Jennifer was discussing the seating arrangements for the wedding, and I said things that supported her decision to treat you poorly. After seeing your interview and really thinking about what happened, I realized I was complicit in something that was fundamentally wrong." Her apology was gracious and seemed genuinely remorseful. "I allowed my concern about social appearances to override basic human decency, and I'm ashamed of that. You deserved better from all of us." "Thank you for saying that, Patricia. It means a great deal to me. I also want you to know that the Charleston social community has been talking about your story, and the response has been overwhelmingly supportive. Many people have expressed admiration for Rebecca's courage in standing up for you, and for your dignity in handling such a difficult situation." The conversation with Patricia made me realize that Jennifer's social concerns about including me in family events had been largely unfounded. The people whose opinions supposedly mattered weren't shocked or uncomfortable about my financial circumstances. If anything, they were more disturbed by the cruelty of excluding an elderly family member than they would have been by the simple fact of my modest lifestyle. As autumn turned to winter, Rebecca and I continued to build our relationship while Jennifer maintained her position that I was manipulating the situation and needed to be isolated from the family. The standoff showed no signs of resolution, but I was increasingly at peace with the situation. I'd found my voice again after years of accepting diminished treatment. I'd reconnected with my granddaughter in an honest and meaningful way. I'd helped other people recognize and address similar situations in their own families. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by my financial circumstances or by other people's comfort with my situation. The woman who'd been hidden away at a wedding reception like a shameful secret was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, and more committed to living with dignity, regardless of what others thought about her circumstances. Jennifer's manipulation had ultimately failed. Her attempts to control the narrative and isolate me from Rebecca had backfired spectacularly, resulting in exactly the kind of public attention and family discord she'd been trying to avoid. More importantly, her years of systematic emotional abuse had been exposed and rejected by the person who mattered most to me. The future remained uncertain. I didn't know if Jennifer would ever acknowledge the harm she'd caused or make genuine efforts to repair our relationship. I didn't know if the broader family would ever fully understand what had really happened or stop viewing me through the lens of Jennifer's manipulations. But I knew that I was no longer willing to accept crumbs of inclusion or settle for managed relationships filtered through someone else's social anxieties. I'd discovered that standing up for myself, even when it was difficult and painful, was better than living as a diminished version of who I really was. The elderly woman who'd driven 8 hours to a wedding where she was seated with the hired help had found her strength in her voice, and neither Jennifer nor anyone else was going to take those away from me again. 6 months after the wedding, I was sitting in my new apartment in Charleston, watching Rebecca and Marcus plant flowers in the garden outside my window, when Jennifer finally called. Not to apologize or reconcile, but to deliver what she clearly intended as a devastating blow. "Eleanor, I thought you should know that Richard and I are getting divorced," she announced without any preamble or greeting. "I hope you're satisfied with how your little publicity campaign has destroyed this family." I set down my coffee cup carefully, processing both the news and Jennifer's attempt to blame me for her marriage problems. "I'm sorry to hear about your divorce, Jennifer. That must be very difficult for everyone involved." "Don't pretend to be sympathetic," Jennifer snapped. "Richard says he can't stand being married to someone who would treat her own mother the way I treated you. He's been questioning everything about our relationship since that ridiculous wedding spectacle." The irony was profound. Jennifer had spent so much energy protecting her social standing and maintaining her perfect facade that she'd apparently lost sight of how her behavior looked to the person closest to her. Richard had witnessed her systematic cruelty toward me and decided he didn't want to be married to someone capable of such calculated manipulation. "Jennifer, I never wanted your marriage to suffer," I said honestly. "I just wanted honesty about what was happening between us." "Honesty?" Jennifer's laugh was bitter. "Your version of honesty has cost me my marriage, damaged my relationship with Rebecca, and made me a social pariah in my own community. Everyone looks at me now like I'm some kind of monster who abuses elderly people." "Maybe that's because you did abuse an elderly person," I replied quietly. "Maybe people are responding to your actions rather than my publicity." The conversation devolved from there, with Jennifer hurling accusations and blame while refusing to acknowledge any responsibility for the consequences of her own choices. She hung up on me after declaring that she would never forgive me for destroying her life, as if my decision to tell the truth about her behavior was somehow more destructive than the behavior itself. But Jennifer's divorce had unexpected ramifications that extended far beyond her personal life. Richard, who had initially seemed supportive of Jennifer's perspective, began reaching out to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by years of Jennifer's manipulation and control. "Eleanor, I owe you a tremendous apology," Richard said when he called me the following week. "Living through this divorce process has shown me how Jennifer operates, how she twists situations to make herself the victim while portraying everyone else as unreasonable or manipulative. I realize now that what she did to you wasn't an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern." "I appreciate you saying that, Richard. I want you to know that I've talked to Rebecca about visiting arrangements, and I want to continue having a relationship with you regardless of what happens between Jennifer and me. You're Rebecca's grandmother, and you deserve to be treated with respect and included in family activities." Richard's change of perspective was validating but also sad. It had taken the dissolution of his marriage for him to recognize the extent of Jennifer's emotional manipulation and the damage it had caused to family relationships. I wondered how many other people in Jennifer's orbit were just beginning to understand the price of enabling her behavior. The divorce proceedings themselves became another source of revelation about Jennifer's character. Rebecca, who was trying to maintain relationships with both parents despite the circumstances, began sharing disturbing details about the process. "Mom is trying to get the judge to rule that Dad's relationship with you is evidence of his poor judgment," Rebecca told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "She's actually arguing that his support for your manipulation of me shows that he's not capable of making sound decisions." Even in divorce court, Jennifer was continuing her campaign to paint me as the manipulative villain in our family drama. She apparently couldn't accept that multiple people might independently conclude that her treatment of me had been wrong and choose to maintain relationships with me despite her disapproval. "Her lawyer is asking for restrictions on Dad's interactions with you as part of the custody agreement for their minor son," Rebecca continued. "She wants the court to legally prevent Dad from including you in family activities when he has custody. The attempt to use legal proceedings to continue controlling my relationships with family members was both shocking and sadly predictable." Jennifer was escalating her efforts to isolate me, apparently believing that if she could get a court to validate her narrative about my supposed manipulation, she could convince Rebecca and others that her version of events was correct. But the strategy backfired spectacularly. The family court judge, after reviewing evidence that included the wedding recordings and media coverage of my story, issued a scathing rebuke of Jennifer's attempts to use custody proceedings to continue her campaign against me. The court finds no evidence that Mrs. Hastings poses any threat to the welfare of the minor child, the judge stated in his ruling. On the contrary, the evidence suggests that Mrs. Pemberton's attempts to isolate family members from Mrs. Hastings may themselves constitute a form of emotional manipulation that is not in the best interests of family relationships. The judge's ruling became public record, and within days it was being shared on social media as another vindication of my decision to speak out about elder abuse within families. Jennifer's legal strategy had not only failed, but had created additional documentation of her pattern of manipulation and control. Meanwhile, my new life in Charleston was flourishing beyond anything I could have imagined 6 months earlier. Rebecca and Marcus had helped me find a small but comfortable apartment just 10 minutes from their home, and I was discovering what it felt like to be genuinely included in a family again. The difference was remarkable. Instead of carefully managed interactions filtered through Jennifer's social anxieties, Rebecca and I now had spontaneous, honest conversations about everything from her work challenges to my thoughts on current events. Instead of being hidden away during social gatherings, I was introduced to their friends as an important family member whose opinions and experiences were valued. "Grandma, remember how Mom used to say you'd be overwhelmed by meeting new people?" Rebecca asked one evening as we prepared dinner together in her kitchen. "Look at you now. You're the most popular person at every party we attend." It was true. Marcus and Rebecca's social circle had embraced me warmly, and I'd discovered that my years of experience and the wisdom I'd gained from surviving devastating loss made me an interesting and valued conversation partner. Far from being embarrassed by my modest circumstances, people seemed impressed by my resilience and interested in hearing about how I'd rebuilt my life. "Your grandmother is remarkable," one of Rebecca's friends told her after a dinner party where I'd shared stories about starting over in my 70s. "She's got such strength and perspective. You're so lucky to have her actively involved in your life." The contrast with Jennifer's predictions about how people would react to my presence couldn't have been more stark. The social embarrassment she'd been so concerned about was entirely a product of her own shame and insecurity rather than any realistic assessment of how others would respond to me. But perhaps the most meaningful development was watching Rebecca blossom into the confident, independent woman she'd always had the potential to become. Free from Jennifer's constant management and manipulation, she was making decisions based on her own values and instincts rather than trying to meet someone else's expectations. "I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years," Rebecca told me one afternoon as we walked through the historic district of Charleston. "I didn't realize how much mental energy I was spending trying to navigate Mom's emotional reactions and social anxieties. Now I can just focus on what actually matters to me." The change in Rebecca was visible to everyone who knew her. She seemed lighter, more spontaneous, more willing to express opinions that might differ from what others expected. The people-pleasing tendencies that Jennifer had cultivated in her were gradually being replaced by genuine confidence and authentic self-expression. "Marcus says I'm becoming more like you," Rebecca said with a smile. "Independent and strong-willed and unwilling to compromise my values for other people's comfort." "Those sound like compliments," I replied. "They are. He says he fell in love with glimpses of that strength in me, but now he gets to see it all the time instead of just when Mom wasn't around to disapprove." As spring arrived, I received an unexpected phone call from a publishing company in New York. A literary agent had seen my television interviews and was interested in helping me write a book about elder abuse within families and the process of reclaiming dignity after financial devastation. "Mrs. Hastings, your story has resonated with so many people because it represents something much larger than one family's drama," the agent explained. "You've accidentally become a voice for elderly people who are experiencing financial discrimination and manipulation from their own families." The idea of writing a book was both exciting and daunting. I'd never considered myself a writer, but I'd certainly lived through experiences that might help other people facing similar challenges. "What would this involve?" I asked. "You'd work with a professional writer to tell your story in detail, but we'd also include practical advice for other elderly people about recognizing manipulation, setting boundaries, and reclaiming their place in family relationships. It could be a valuable resource for families struggling with these issues." I agreed to explore the possibility, And over the following months, I worked with a talented writer to craft a book that told my story while providing practical guidance for others facing similar situations. The process was therapeutic, allowing me to reflect on everything I'd learned about strength, dignity, and the importance of refusing to accept diminished treatment. The book was published the following year and became a surprising bestseller, particularly among older readers who recognized their own experiences in my story. I began receiving letters from people all over the country who had been inspired to have difficult conversations with their families, or to set boundaries around how they were willing to be treated. Your book gave me the courage to tell my daughter that I wouldn't continue accepting her charity case treatment, wrote one woman from Oregon. We had a hard conversation, but now she includes me in family decisions and treats me like a capable adult, rather than a burden she has to manage. The book tour and media appearances that followed were surreal for someone who'd been living quietly in Georgia just 2 years earlier, but they also provided platform to advocate for broader awareness of elder abuse and to encourage families to examine their own dynamics around aging and financial circumstances. The most satisfying moment came when I was invited to speak at a conference on elder rights, where I shared the stage with social workers, legal advocates, and policy experts who were working to address the systematic problems I'd accidentally stumbled into highlighting. Mrs. Hastings represents something crucial, one of the other speakers said during a panel discussion. She shows that elderly people don't have to accept diminished treatment just because their circumstances have changed. She demonstrates that dignity and self-advocacy are possible at any age and in any situation. Jennifer, meanwhile, had essentially disappeared from all of our lives. After her divorce was finalized, she moved to Florida to live near her sister Margaret, apparently hoping to start fresh in a community where her family drama wouldn't follow her. She maintained minimal contact with Rebecca, usually limited to birthday cards and holiday greetings that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "Do you ever miss having a normal relationship with Mom?" Rebecca asked me one day as we planned her first anniversary celebration. "I miss the mother I thought she was," I replied honestly. "I miss believing that her love for me was unconditional and that she would protect rather than hurt me. But I don't miss the manipulation and control and constant anxiety about whether I was meeting her standards." "I feel the same way," Rebecca said. "I miss the idea of having a close relationship with my mother, but I don't miss walking on eggshells or having every interaction filtered through her social anxieties." The anniversary celebration itself was a beautiful example of how different family dynamics could be when built on honesty and mutual respect rather than control and manipulation. Rebecca and Marcus hosted a small gathering that included close friends, Marcus's family, Richard, and me. The atmosphere was warm and inclusive, with no one being seated at a designated table or excluded from conversations. "Last year at this time, I thought Grandma was too fragile to walk me down the aisle," Rebecca said during her anniversary toast. "This year, she's published a best-selling book and become a nationally recognized advocate for elder rights. It turns out the only thing fragile about her was how she was being treated by people who claimed to love her." The laughter and applause that followed felt like vindication for everything I'd been through. I'd gone from being the embarrassing relative hidden away at family events to being someone whose strength and advocacy work was celebrated and respected. But the real measure of how much had changed came in smaller everyday moments. Sunday dinners where my opinions were sought and valued. Holiday plans that were made with my preferences in mind. Conversations where I was treated as an equal participant, rather than someone who needed protection from difficult topics. "You know what I love most about our relationship now?" Rebecca asked me as we sat on her porch one evening, watching fireflies dance in the garden. "What's that?" "I love that I know who you really are, instead of who Mom told me you were. I love that you feel free to disagree with me or challenge my thinking instead of always being the accommodating grandmother who never causes problems." That observation captured something important about what had been lost and found in our family relationships. Jennifer's management and control hadn't just isolated me from family events. It had prevented authentic relationships from developing. Rebecca and I were now free to know each other as real people, with complex thoughts and feelings, rather than playing assigned roles in Jennifer's family drama. As I prepared for my 74th birthday, surrounded by people who genuinely valued my presence and participation in their lives. I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The financial devastation that had started this whole saga had been genuinely traumatic, stripping away security and forcing me to rebuild my life from scratch. But in surviving that loss and the subsequent family betrayal, I'd discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by my bank account or my ability to contribute financially to family gatherings. I'd found my voice after years of accepting diminished treatment, and that voice had helped not just me but countless other people facing similar challenges. The woman who'd driven 8 hours to be humiliated at her granddaughter's wedding was gone. In her place was someone who understood that love, without respect, wasn't really love at all, that family relationships built on manipulation and control were ultimately hollow, and that standing up for dignity and truth was always worth the cost. Jennifer's attempts to manage and control our family relationships had ultimately destroyed the very social standing she'd been trying to protect. Her marriage had ended, her relationship with Rebecca was distant and formal, and her reputation in the community had been permanently damaged by her own actions rather than by my response to them. Meanwhile, the people who'd chosen honesty over manipulation, respect over control, had found deeper and more meaningful relationships than we'd ever had before. Rebecca and Marcus had built a marriage based on authenticity and mutual support. Richard had learned to recognize and reject manipulative behavior. I had reclaimed my place as a valued family member and discovered a new purpose in advocating for others facing similar challenges. The ending wasn't the fairy tale reconciliation that some people might have hoped for. Jennifer never apologized or acknowledged the harm she'd caused. She never recognized that her behavior had been wrong or worked to repair the relationships she'd damaged through years of manipulation. But sometimes the most important victories aren't about changing other people. Sometimes they're about refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. About finding the courage to speak truth even when it's difficult. About building relationships based on genuine love and respect rather than fear and control. I'd found my voice, reclaimed my dignity, and helped others do the same. Rebecca had learned to trust her own instincts and make decisions based on her values rather than other people's expectations. Our family had been fractured by truth-telling, but what remained was stronger and more authentic than what had existed before. The woman sitting in her Charleston apartment, surrounded by people who loved and respected her exactly as she was, bore little resemblance to the diminished figure who'd once accepted crumbs of inclusion from her own family. That transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every difficult conversation and painful revelation. Because at the end of the day, living authentically and being treated with dignity was better than maintaining false peace through accepting diminished treatment. The price of speaking out had been high, but the cost of staying silent would have been my soul. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.